The morning sun cast long shadows across Westminster Abbey as thousands of people lined the ancient streets of London. Kate Middleton sat in the back seat of the royal car, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her cream-colored coat for the 100th time. Today was different from any other day she had experienced since joining the royal family. Today, she would face the most challenging moment of her royal life. The crowds were already gathering outside Buckingham Palace, their voices creating a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the city itself. News reporters from around the world had positioned their cameras at every possible angle, each one hoping to capture the moment that everyone knew was coming. But nobody, not even Kate herself, truly understood how powerful that moment would become. Inside the palace walls, tension filled the air like thick fog. Palace staff moved with unusual urgency, their footsteps echoing through the marble corridors. The Queen sat in her private study, looking out at the gathering crowd through heavy curtains. Her face showed no emotion, but those who knew her well could see the weight of decades pressing down on her shoulders. Kate had spent the previous night unable to sleep, staring out her window at the city lights. She thought about her children, about William, about the responsibility that now rested on her shoulders. The protocol had been explained to her dozens of times, but knowing what to do and actually doing it were two very different things. This wasn't just about following rules anymore. This was about showing the world who she really was. The phone calls had been coming in all morning. World leaders, family members, close friends, everyone wanted to know how she was feeling, what she was thinking. But Kate had stopped answering after the 5th call. She needed silence. She needed to prepare herself for what lay ahead. As her car moved through the London streets, Kate watched the faces of the people pressed against the barriers. Some were crying, others were cheering, and many simply stood in respectful silence. These were her people now, in a way that felt both overwhelming and deeply meaningful. Every decision she made would affect them. Every gesture would be remembered. The weight of history seemed to settle on her shoulders as the palace came into view. She could see the balcony where so many important moments had taken place over the years. Soon, she would stand there herself, but not in the way anyone had expected. The circumstances that brought her to this moment were ones that nobody could have predicted just months before. William squeezed her hand as their car pulled through the palace gates. He understood what she was going through better than anyone else could. He had lived with this kind of pressure his entire life, but for Kate it was still relatively new. The cameras, the expectations, the knowledge that millions of people around the world would be watching her every move. It was enough to make anyone feel small. But as Kate stepped out of the car and felt the cool London air on her face, something changed inside her. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something else. A sense of purpose that she had never felt quite so strongly before. She thought about all the people who had stood in this same place before her, facing their own moments of truth. The palace doors opened, and Kate walked inside, knowing that when she emerged again, everything would be different. The young woman who had once been just Kate Middleton was about to become something more. The crowds outside grew quieter as if they could sense that. The moment they had all been waiting for was finally approaching. Inside the palace, Kate moved through rooms that had witnessed centuries of British history. The walls seemed to whisper stories of queens and kings, of moments that had shaped nations and changed the course of history. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished floors as she made her way to the private chambers where she would prepare for what lay ahead. The Queen's personal secretary approached Kate with the kind of gentle formality that only comes from years of service to the crown. There were final details to discuss, last-minute protocols to review. But Kate found it difficult to focus on the words. Her mind kept drifting to the faces she had seen in the crowd, to the weight of expectations that seemed to grow heavier. with each passing minute. In the mirror of the preparation room, Kate studied her own reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed both familiar and foreign. This was still the same person who had once lived a relatively normal life, who had worried about ordinary things like work deadlines and weekend plans. But the eyes in the mirror held something new, a depth of understanding about duty and sacrifice that had not been there before. Lady Susan, one of the Queen's longest-serving ladies-in-waiting, entered the room quietly. She had seen many important moments in her decades of service, but even she seemed affected by the significance of this day. Her hands were steady as she helped Kate with final adjustments to her outfit, but her voice carried an unusual emotional weight when she spoke. The sounds from outside were getting louder. More people were arriving every minute, their voices blending together into something that sounded almost like singing. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras trying to capture every angle of the historic scene that was unfolding. Social media was already buzzing with speculation and anticipation, with people from around the world sharing their thoughts and feelings about what was about to happen. Kate's children had been asking questions all morning, the kind of innocent, direct questions that children ask when they sense that something important is happening but don't fully understand what it means. William had done his best to explain. But how do you help a child understand the weight of history when you're still trying to understand it yourself? The palace staff moved with the kind of precision that comes from years of training. But Kate could see something different in their faces today. This wasn't just another royal ceremony or formal event. This was personal. Many of these people had worked in the palace for decades, had served the royal family through good times and difficult ones. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, what this moment meant. As Kate sat in the quiet preparation room, she allowed herself a moment to think about her journey to this point. From a young woman living in a small flat to a member of the most famous family in the world, it had been a path filled with unexpected turns and challenges that she could never have imagined when she was younger. The protocol officer entered with a clipboard and a serious expression. There were specific ways to walk, particular gestures to make, exact words that needed to be spoken. But Kate realized that all the protocol in the world couldn't prepare her for the emotional reality of what she was about to do. This was about something deeper than rules and traditions. Outside her window, Kate could see more crowds gathering. People had traveled from all over the country, from all over the world, to be present for this moment. Some had camped out all night, others had flown in that very morning. They came from different backgrounds, different cultures, different walks of life, but they were all united by their desire to witness something that they knew would be remembered for generations to come. The weight of their expectations was almost overwhelming, but it was also inspiring. Kate realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt the need to show respect, to acknowledge something greater than themselves, to participate in a moment that would become part of history. As the final preparations were completed, Kate took a deep breath and prepared to step into a moment that would define not just her own future, but the future of the monarchy itself. The palace doors opened with a sound that seemed to echo across London itself. Kate stepped into the afternoon light, and immediately the atmosphere changed. The thousands of people who had been waiting fell into an expectant hush, as if the entire city was holding its breath. Camera flashes began going off like tiny lightning strikes, creating a surreal strobe effect that made the moment feel both dreamlike and intensely real. Kate began walking across the palace courtyard, each step measured and deliberate. She had practiced this walk dozens of times, but nothing could have prepared her for the actual experience. The crowd stretched as far as she could see, faces pressed against barriers, phones and cameras held high, everyone trying to capture their own piece of this historic moment. The Queen stood waiting on the palace steps, her figure small but commanding against the backdrop of the ancient building. Despite her age, she stood perfectly straight, her presence radiating the kind of authority that comes from decades of service and sacrifice. Her eyes met Kate's across the courtyard, and in that brief moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words. As Kate moved closer, she could hear individual voices from the crowd. Someone called out her name. Another person shouted words of encouragement. Children were lifted onto shoulders so they could see better, their excited voices adding to the emotional tapestry of the moment. This wasn't just a formal ceremony anymore. It had become something that belonged to everyone present. The media representatives positioned around the courtyard were working frantically, knowing that they were witnessing something that would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. Every gesture, every expression, every subtle movement would be examined and interpreted. But Kate tried to block out the cameras and focus on what was really happening, this deeply personal moment of respect and acknowledgement. William walked beside her, his presence both comforting and significant. He had been preparing for moments like this his entire life, but even he seemed affected by the gravity of what was unfolding. The two of them had faced many public moments together, but this one felt different. This one felt like it would define their relationship with the British people for generations to come. The palace guards stood at attention, their red uniforms a splash of color against the gray stone of the building. They had witnessed countless royal ceremonies over the years, but even these disciplined soldiers seemed moved by what they were seeing. Their usual stoic expressions showed subtle signs of emotion, small cracks in their professional composure that revealed their humanity. Kate approached the final steps. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about all the women who had walked this same path before her, who had faced their own moments of truth in this very place. Some had been born into this role, others had married into it, but all of them had found ways to carry the burden of public expectation while remaining true to themselves. The crowd behind her had grown completely silent now, the only sounds being the clicking of camera shutters and the distant hum of traffic from the London streets beyond. Even the children had stopped talking, sensing that something profoundly important was about to happen. The moment stretched out, seeming to last both forever and no time at all. Kate could see the details of the Queen's face now, the lines that spoke of decades of service, the eyes that had seen the country through times of joy and sorrow, the slight tremor in her hands that revealed her humanity beneath the crown. This woman had been a constant presence in British life for longer than most people could remember, and now Kate was about to show her the kind of respect that the moment demanded. The last few steps felt like they took hours to complete. Kate was acutely aware of everything around her. The texture of the stone beneath her feet, the cool air on her skin, the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. She could feel the eyes of the world upon her, but more importantly, she could feel the weight of doing what was right, regardless of protocol or expectation. As she reached the Queen, Kate paused for just a moment, looking into the eyes of the woman who had dedicated her entire life to service. In that pause, everything that was about to happen seemed to crystallize into something both inevitable and deeply meaningful. Time seemed to stop completely as Kate stood before the Queen. The silence in the courtyard was so complete that it felt almost sacred, as if the entire world was holding its breath for what would happen next. Kate could feel her heart beating in her chest, each pulse seeming to echo in the stillness around her. Then, slowly and with perfect grace, Kate began to lower herself into the most respectful curtsy she had ever performed. It wasn't just a formal gesture learned from protocol lessons. It was something that came from deep within her heart, a genuine expression of respect and acknowledgement that surprised even her with its emotional power. As Kate's head bowed and her body lowered, something extraordinary happened in the crowd. Those who had been standing fell silent, many removing their hats without even thinking about it. Some people began to bow their heads as well, instinctively following Kate's lead in showing respect. Others simply watched with tears in their eyes as they witnessed what they knew was a moment that would be remembered forever. The Queen's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. Her usually composed features softened slightly, and those who knew her well could see a flash of genuine emotion cross her face. This wasn't just another royal protocol being followed. This was her granddaughter-in-law showing her the kind of respect that came from the heart, not from a rule book. Kate held the curtsy for what felt like an eternity, but was actually only a few seconds. In that time, she thought about everything that had brought her to this moment: her childhood, her education, meeting William, joining the royal family, and all the challenges and joys that had shaped her journey. This curtsy represented not just respect for the Queen, but acknowledgement of her own transformation into someone who could carry the weight of royal responsibility. As Kate slowly rose from her curtsy, the Queen stepped forward slightly and spoke, words that only Kate could hear. The content of those words would remain private, but their effect was visible to everyone watching. Kate's eyes filled with tears, and a small, genuine smile crossed her face, the kind of smile that comes from receiving unexpected kindness in a moment of vulnerability. The crowd seemed to sense that they had witnessed something special. The silence began to break as people started to whisper to each other, sharing their thoughts about what they had just seen. Some were crying openly, moved by the obvious emotion of the moment. Others stood in respectful quiet, still processing the significance of what had just unfolded before their eyes. Camera operators worked frantically to capture every angle of the historic moment, knowing that these images would be shown around the world and studied by historians for decades to come. But even the most experienced photographers seemed affected by what they were witnessing. Many later said that they had never felt such emotional intensity while working a royal event. William watched his wife with obvious pride and love. He had seen Kate handle many difficult situations since joining the royal family, but this moment seemed to represent something deeper: her complete acceptance of the role that life had given her and her willingness to embrace it with both dignity and genuine emotion. The Queen's ladies-in-waiting, standing discreetly nearby, exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They had served the royal family through many significant moments, but even they seemed moved by the authenticity of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just ceremony. This was real human connection happening in front of thousands of people. Children in the crowd, many of whom had been brought by their parents to witness history, watched with wide eyes. They might not have understood all the complexities of royal protocol, but they could sense that something important was happening. Many would remember this moment for the rest of their lives, telling their own children and grandchildren about the day they saw Kate bow to the Queen. The moment began to transform as Kate and the Queen stood facing each other. What had started as a formal gesture had become something much more personal and meaningful. The two women, separated by decades of age and experience but united by their commitment to service, shared a brief but profound connection that touched everyone who witnessed it. As the initial impact of the curtsy began to settle, people in the crowd started to realize that they had just seen something that would be talked about and remembered for generations. This wasn't just another royal appearance. This was a moment that captured something essential about respect, duty, and the human connections that make even the most formal ceremonies meaningful. As Kate rose from her curtsy, the atmosphere in the palace courtyard shifted, like weather changing from storm to sunshine. The crowd, which had been holding its collective breath, began to release that tension in waves of emotion. Some people applauded spontaneously, others wiped tears from their eyes, and many simply stood in contemplative silence, processing what they had just witnessed. The Queen, rarely one to show public emotion, seemed visibly moved by the gesture. She reached out and gently touched Kate's arm, a small action that spoke volumes to those who understood royal protocol. This wasn't just acknowledgement of proper behavior. It was genuine appreciation for a moment of authentic respect that had transcended mere ceremony. News reporters scattered throughout the crowd were already working on their stories, knowing that this moment would dominate headlines around the world. Social media began exploding with photos, videos, and commentary as people who had witnessed the curtsy shared their experiences with friends and family across the globe. The hashtag #KateBowed began trending within minutes as millions of people discussed what they had seen. William stepped closer to his wife, his pride evident in his expression. He had always known that Kate possessed the strength and grace needed for royal life, but this moment seemed to crystallize everything he admired about her. The three of them, William, Kate, and the Queen, stood together for a moment that photographers would later describe as capturing the past, present, and future of the British monarchy in a single frame. The palace staff, who had witnessed countless royal events over their years of service, found themselves unexpectedly emotional. Many had worked with Kate since she joined the family, watching her navigate the challenges of royal life with increasing confidence and grace. This moment felt like a culmination of that journey, a public declaration of her commitment to the role she had accepted. As the initial intensity of the moment began to settle, Kate and the Queen moved toward the palace entrance, followed by William and other members of the royal family. The crowd began to disperse slowly, many people reluctant to leave the place where they had witnessed something so meaningful. Conversations started up everywhere as strangers turned to each other to share their thoughts about what they had just seen. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was electric with emotion and significance. Staff members who had maintained their professional composure during the public ceremony now allowed themselves to express their feelings about what had just occurred. Many spoke about how Kate's curtsy had felt different from other formal gestures they had witnessed, more personal, more genuine, more emotionally powerful. The international media response was immediate and overwhelming. News networks around the world interrupted their regular programming to show footage of the curtsy, with commentators trying to capture the significance of what had just happened. Royal experts were called in to provide context, but many admitted that they had never seen anything quite like this before. Kate herself seemed somewhat overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of what she had just experienced. In the private moments immediately following the public ceremony, those close to her noticed that she seemed both exhausted and energized at the same time. The curtsy had taken something out of her, but it had also given her something back, a deeper understanding of her own role and capabilities. The Queen, now in the privacy of the palace, allowed herself a moment to reflect on what had just occurred. Those who served her closely noticed that she seemed more relaxed than she had been in weeks, as if some important question had been answered or some significant worry had been resolved. Kate's gesture had clearly meant more to her than anyone could have anticipated. Phone calls began pouring in from around the world as political leaders, celebrities, and ordinary citizens reached out to express their thoughts about what they had witnessed. The palace switchboard was overwhelmed with calls from people who simply wanted to share their emotional reactions to the curtsy. Many spoke about feeling moved to tears without fully understanding why. As evening approached and the crowds finally began to thin, the true impact of the day started to become clear. This hadn't just been another royal event. It had been a moment that touched something deep in people's hearts and minds. Kate's curtsy had somehow captured feelings about respect, tradition, duty, and human connection that resonated with people far beyond the usual royal watchers. The images from the day would be analyzed and discussed for years to come, but those who were present understood that no photograph or video could fully capture the emotional power of being there in person. They had witnessed something that would become part of British history, and they knew it. In the days that followed Kate's historic curtsy, the ripple effects of that single moment continued to spread across the world like circles expanding on the surface of a still pond. Newspapers dedicated entire front pages to photographs of the gesture, with headlines that tried to capture its significance in words that somehow never felt quite adequate to express what people had witnessed. Letters began arriving at Buckingham Palace by the thousands, not just from Britain, but from every corner of the globe. People wrote to share how Kate's curtsy had moved them, how it had reminded them of the importance of showing respect and gratitude in their own lives. Many described feeling inspired to reach out to their own grandparents, parents, or mentors with expressions of appreciation they had been putting off for too long. Schools across the country began incorporating the moment into their lessons about respect, tradition, and the importance of acknowledging those who have served others. Children drew pictures of Kate's curtsy in art class, wrote essays about what respect means to them, and discussed how they could show similar appreciation to the important people in their own lives. Kate herself found that the curtsy had changed. Something fundamental about how she approached her royal duties. The gesture had somehow crystallized her understanding of what it meant to serve, not just the monarchy or the country, but the deeper values that connect people across generations and cultures. She carried this new understanding into every subsequent royal engagement, meeting, and public appearance. The Queen, in her own private moments, often reflected on that afternoon in the palace courtyard. The curtsy had represented something she had hoped for, but never expected to see so clearly. Genuine, respect and affection from someone who hadn't been born into royal life but had chosen to embrace it fully. It had been a gift that went far beyond protocol or duty. Royal historians began analyzing the moment within the broader context of the monarchy's evolution. Many noted that Kate's curtsy represented a bridge between traditional values and modern sensibilities, a way of honoring the past while moving confidently into the future. It had been both deeply traditional and remarkably contemporary at the same time. International leaders privately commented on how the moment had affected their own understanding of leadership and respect. Several world figures were heard to say that Kate's gesture had reminded them of the importance of acknowledging those who had paved the way for their own achievements, regardless of political differences or personal ambitions. The video of the curtsy became one of the most watched royal moments in internet history, shared millions of times across social media platforms. But more importantly, it sparked countless conversations about respect, gratitude, and the ways people can honor those who have influenced their lives. Comment sections filled with personal stories of people's own moments of appreciation and acknowledgement. Fashion designers began creating clothing inspired by Kate's outfit from that day, but they found that no recreation could capture the essential element that had made the moment special, the genuine emotion and respect that had motivated the gesture. The curtsy had transcended fashion to become something much more meaningful. Years later, when royal experts and historians looked back on significant moments in the monarchy's recent history, Kate's curtsy would consistently be mentioned as a turning point, a moment when public perception of the royal family shifted in a positive direction because of one person's authentic expression of respect and appreciation. Children who had been present that day would grow up with the memory of Kate's curtsy as a defining moment in their understanding of what it means to show genuine respect to others. Many would later say that witnessing that gesture had influenced their own approach to relationships, work, and community involvement throughout their lives. The curtsy had also changed the relationship between Kate and the British public in ways that would become clear over time. People felt that they had seen her true character in that moment, and their trust and affection for her deepened as a result. She had shown them that it was possible to honor tradition while remaining authentic and emotionally genuine. As the months and years passed, the image of Kate's curtsy would appear in documentaries, history books, and museum exhibitions about the British monarchy. But those who had been present that day knew that no historical record could fully capture the emotional power of the moment. The way it had made everyone present feel connected to something larger than themselves. The legacy of that single gesture continued to inspire people around the world to find their own ways of showing respect and appreciation to those who had shaped their lives. Kate's curtsy had become more than just a moment in royal history. It had become a reminder of the power of genuine human connection and the importance of acknowledging the contributions of others with grace, dignity, and authentic emotion.